Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm the City Witch. So today's video is on the subject of deities and the divine, and I've been asked to do this video by a lovely client of mine who's interested in learning how to choose a god or goddess to include in their spiritual path. And one of the things I want to start with in this video, guys, is make it absolutely clear that you don't have to include a god or a goddess or any deities whatsoever in your spiritual practice if you don't want to. It is completely up to you. Many witches choose not to work with the divine or any deities whatsoever and have no problems in their spiritual path or their witchcraft at all. Now, I myself do incorporate deities into my path and have worked with many over the years, and I'm going to give you some tips and pointers that I've discovered that's been really helpful along my path. So let's get started, shall we? As we have a lot to cover in this video, guys, I'm going to do my best to break it down into as many smaller pieces as I possibly can in order to make this clear for you to understand. Now, the word deity is a word used to represent god and goddesses, particularly in religions around the world that believe in more than one god and goddess. So I will be using the terms gods, goddesses and deities interchangeably throughout this video. So I just wanted to make sure you understand what the word deity means, and it basically just means gods and goddesses. So in the intro, I mentioned that you don't have to incorporate a god and a goddess into your witchcraft, into your spiritual path. The reason I said that in the intro is because I wanted to make it clear to you guys that it isn't something you have to do. And these days there are a lot of books covering the subject of the divine and incorporating deities into your magic, but it's not necessary, it's not something you have to do, and many witches conduct their spirituality, their witchcraft and spells and rituals successfully without the use of gods and goddesses. And actually what I would recommend, if you're feeling uncomfortable with the idea of incorporating a specific god and goddess, instead consider the pagan god and goddess, which is the triple god and the triple goddess. And the idea behind those two is that they represent the stages of life that we all experience as humans. So for the god, it would be young lord, warrior and sage. And for the goddess, it's maiden, mother and crone. And those stages are something that we all go through in our lives and we all experience at some point, and it's easy for us to resonate with those because of that. And also they represent the divine male and female forces in the world around us, so it is very easy to incorporate those instead of a specific god and goddess. And as they are all encompassing and represent akashic energy, when summoned together they also offer balance to your circles. So maybe consider that and researching the pagan beliefs behind that instead of a specific deity. Now, moving on to the main part of the video. So I've been asked to do this video because a number of my clients and students have been considering incorporating a god and goddess into their spirituality, but they're struggling with how to make a choice and how to connect with those forces. So the first point I'm going to make is that any deity that you're considering incorporating into your craft must be thoroughly researched. And I mentioned this in my first video last week where I talked about mythology books. And the reason I did that one first is because I find that witchcraft books are a little bit irresponsible because they don't give you all the information surrounding a particular god and goddess that you're thinking about working with. So by getting yourself a really good mythology book, and probably more than one, will give you more insight and information and the origin stories of that particular deity and what culture they belong to, which is really handy for considering whether they will fit into your spiritual path or not. So definitely do your research and thoroughly look up as much information as you possibly can about whatever deity you're considering working with. I'm going to move on to my next point now. So my next point is that when you are considering a god or goddess, so say you've got to the point where you've selected one you like the sound of, you've researched them, they seem okay, you're now kind of at the point where should I or shouldn't I? Well, think of this a little bit like a dating app, guys. So in stage one, you're basically flipping through all the potential partners. So in this case, you're flipping through all the potential deities and you get to one that you kind of like the look of. So consider at that point that All this is an interview. So you've looked at a picture or some artwork of that deity, you've read a description, meaning you've looked at their mythology, the stories surrounding them, and you've got a general basic idea of what they are like, and you like the sound of it. Now comes the dating bit. So the dating bit in respect for the divine is where you start to build a relationship. So how do you do that? Because it's not like you can invite them for a candlelit dinner and get to know them, is it? So I thoroughly recommend, first of all, after you've carefully researched and read as many books as possible, you need to start figuring out a way to include them in your path, in your spirituality. So the easy way for you to do that is to build a relationship. Now, how I've done that in the past is I have made myself a little altar or shrine where I could often pray and communicate with those divine forces. It's a sacred space in honour of them as well, so it's something they enjoy, and it's a way to include them not only in your life and your spirituality, but in your home as well. You can leave offerings on a regular basis there, and when you leave offerings, especially if they're live items like fruit, the divine force in question will absorb the essence of the offering, but then the actual raw item, so the shell, so say it's an apple, the essence has been absorbed, so the energy's gone, but there's still an apple there. So rather than let it go to waste on that altar or shrine, after about a day I remove it and place it out in nature so that nature can benefit from that offering, because you can't eat it yourself because you've offered it to the divine, but you can certainly put the remains outside and nature can consume it. So that's another way to continue an offering. You can leave sacred water and flowers on the altar, like candles and incense. You can leave a small cauldron there as well and burn letters on a regular basis to your deities. You can meditate in front of your shrine, and actually before you meditate you can invite that force into your meditation, and they might hopefully give you some signs, symbols or omens during that meditation. You can ask them to come into your dreams as well just before you go to sleep, and you can certainly do some relaxation techniques in order to connect to them. Another good idea as well when researching your deities is to consider what they like. So don't just leave anything on your altar as an offering. Consider that specific deity and what they like. So one of my deities, for example, she really likes apples, she appreciates pomegranates, she likes blood as an offering, she likes certain types of flowers. The willow is her sacred tree, so you can leave willow bark on her altar as well, or burn it as an incense. So there's a number of different things that I can do for her, and obviously out of all of those it's my choice which one I feel comfortable using. So I know I mentioned blood there, and some of you are going, oh, I wouldn't do that. But ladies, you do have your time of the month, so you can make that as an offering, and actually that's considered very sacred if you're offering to a goddess in particular, so something to consider. But if you feel uncomfortable, don't do it. But if you are thinking about doing it and you want to know how, then look at my blood magic video which explains it all in that. So look up what your deity likes, look up what they're associated with, and also look at the animals they're associated with and any colours as well that are sacred to them, because you can dress that shrine or that sacred space in colours that they like. You can incorporate animal statues as well, or little things on the altar that represent that animal. You can also dedicate your time to a certain animal organisation and tell that deity that you're doing it on their behalf, and that you are sacrificing your time and your energy into taking care of an animal that you know is sacred to them. So that's all good ways to begin forging a connection. What you'll find as well as you start developing this relationship, and you should do this over the course of several months as well before incorporating them in any spiritual practice. This is just the getting to know stage, so do it over the course of quite a few months, and during those months what you'll find is you'll start receiving signs, symbols and omens that that deity is listening to you. You may start to smell or hear certain things that associate with them or remind you of them. A song could come on the radio and they're mentioned, or that song might for some reason remind you of that deity. You might get lots of animal associations connected with that deity. You might also find that certain foods you're attracted to that are sacred to that deity. So there's all these sort of signs that you need to keep an eye out for and watch out for to see if that divine force is actually communicating with you. And if you start to get these coming through, signs that they are actually in your life and they're listening and that they are really building a relationship with you, what you'll find is whatever area that deity rules over, so let's say Aphrodite, for example, we know that one of the biggest areas she rules over is love. So say your love life dramatically starts improving, that everybody finds you attractive, wonderful to be around, that's called a divine blessing. So it means that deity is not only in your life listening to you, naturally that deity is now starting to bless that area of your life because they want you to know they're there and they're listening and they're helping you and they appreciate your devotion to them. So that's also a good way to tell that they are in your life and that they are considering working with you. Once that connection is made and you're aware that divine force is in your life and they're listening to you and you've received several symbols, signs and omens, and obviously you've been working with them for a long period of time, this is the point where you can start praying to them, incorporating them in ceremonies and rituals, and of course asking for their blessing during spells. Now at this point I will say that when you start incorporating them in spells, definitely make sure that deity is going to be helpful in that spell. So I wouldn't summon Aphrodite, for example, if you were doing a curse breaker spell, because she's a goddess that rules over love. She doesn't really deal with that. So make sure that when you're utilizing the energy of this force, that it makes sense to what you're working in. So certainly ceremonies and prayers and rituals, it's fine to incorporate these divine forces, but when it comes to spells are specific to a certain need, so make sure the divine force you're incorporating reflects that, so it all makes sense, guys. When you do start considering incorporating these divine forces for spell work, I would advise you to start off small to begin with. So as I've used Aphrodite as an example, I'll use her again. So if you were summoning Aphrodite for a spell, I certainly wouldn't start by asking her to bring your divine other half to you, your soulmate, your twin flame, because that's a pretty big ask. And you've only just forged this friendship with her, this connection. So I would start small. So start with maybe self-love work and self-development and calling upon her to help work on yourself. Maybe your self-image, it's something you don't like. You don't look in the mirror and go, oh, you sexy beast. Instead, you look in the mirror and go, oh, I'm fat and flabby, or oh, I've let myself go. Maybe this is where you incorporate Aphrodite and say, Aphrodite, I really need some help with my self-image. I'm uncomfortable with myself, but I need to feel love for myself. I need to self-love more. Can you help me with that, please? And start doing some spells and rituals to incorporate her and ask for her divine help in that area. And then once you see success there, then maybe perhaps you start asking her to help with friendships that have gone awry, mending broken bridges. Then you start building up to maybe just simply bringing in a lover into your life if you're single, or maybe spicing up your current relationship. And then later down the line, maybe you ask for bigger things like asking to bring love to a certain friend or family member, and then later start working with soulmate energy. So there's a certain stage that you can start incorporating these things, but do it in such a way that it makes sense. And obviously don't ask for big things straight away, because that's pretty rude. I mean, I wouldn't make friends with you and ask you to borrow me £1,000 off the get-go. That's not going to happen. But maybe 10 years down the line, if I really needed the money and asked you for £1,000, maybe you're likely to go, you know what, yeah, I've known you for 10 years, I can trust you, I'll borrow you the money, you clearly need it. And that's because I've built that relationship with you. Now here's another example at this stage. The reason why I say this to you guys is because these divine forces have massive influence over our lives, and all of them have human emotion, and that's proven through the stories that we read. So when you research these forces, you're obviously going to come across stories where these forces have negative aspects or a darker side. Good example of this is Zeus and Hera. So Zeus was married to Hera, she was his queen, and they ruled over Olympus. But Zeus had a wandering eye, so it was very common for him to start going off with other women, particularly mortal women, and of course that angered Hera greatly because she was supposed to be his wife and he was supposed to be faithful and loyal to her, but he kept having all these demigods with these human women, and he kept having children with other gods and goddesses, so this started to cause problems. And of course Hera was a very jealous queen, so she would often get jealous, smiting Zeus's children, bringing misfortune down on those women who dare lay with him, and often it wasn't even their fault, they were tricked. But that's not the way Hera saw it, because it takes two to tango. So in her mind, they were just as guilty, or they must have lured him away. So this is where we see in this story that yes, there's a great love affair going on, but there's also anger, jealousy, hate, and eventually vengeance. So all these energies and all these emotions still influence the divine. So because of that, I'm just gently reminding you guys that these forces, you know, they experience all these human emotions, but they have more power in their pinky than we do. And the last thing you want is to pee them off and insult them in any way. So I'm going to break this down simply here for you. So let's say, for example, you asked to borrow £1,000 from a complete stranger. As I pointed out, that's not going to happen, is it? That stranger is going to go, I don't know who you are, I don't know if I can trust you, I don't know if I'm going to get that money back, so hell no. If you ask a work colleague, they may and ah about it for a little bit, but they might be uncomfortable with the amount you're asking for. And even though they know you and they obviously have worked with you for a certain length of time, they may not socialise with you, so therefore they don't love you, they don't have a bond to you, but they do know you. So even though you get that and ah, they're likely to say no. However, we now get to asking family and friends. If you asked a family member or a friend that you've known for, 10 plus years, chances are they're going to say, yes, I will borrow you that money, and actually I will borrow you more money because I want to know that you're covered and that you're secure, because I don't want you to worry, I don't want you to be in distress in any way. And the reason they'll behave that way, guys, is because they love you, they care about you. They're less likely to bug you for when you're going to pay that money back. They're not going to chase you or hound you for it, and the reason is because they trust you to pay it back. So this is the reason why we say to build a relationship with your divine. Starting off, they're a stranger, so you must build that relationship. Then they start becoming a co-worker because you are incorporating them in your spiritual path, but they're maybe not quite a friend yet. They don't love you yet. But when they start becoming part of your family, part of your spirituality, and you have built that connection with them where they love you and they appreciate you and they start to show up in your life and do these wonderful things for you on their own without being asked, that is the point where you've got a truly wonderful connection and relationship with that divine force. That is when you can start asking them for things and they're likely to say yes and help you. Ways that you can start developing your connections with your divine force. So you've chosen a god and goddess, you've forged a relationship with them. How do you start making them happy and incorporating them in your life? Well, I've already mentioned having a shrine. So a shrine or an altar in your home or your sacred space is a really good way to include them in your life and your home. Another one is to make offerings to them, and the offerings must be something that represents them, so something that they like and enjoy. An offering can be a statue or a piece of art. It could be a fruit or flowers or specific candles. A sacrifice, however, is something that you give up at a great loss to yourself. So sacrificing time is a good way to sacrifice to a deity, so putting your energy into something that they care about, that has meaning to them. Another thing is dedicating your time and energy. So as I've said before, putting that into things that they appreciate. So clearing up a forest area, looking after animals, planting trees and flowers in your garden, maintaining your garden, cleaning up litter that other people have left. All of these things are helpful towards forging a connection with your divine force. And then once you forge that connection, guys, and you're quite comfortable with them in your life, you don't have to stick to that one force. You can start incorporating other energies. So once you've built one connection with the deity, you can then think, oh, okay, well, I like this deity, so I might incorporate another one. Now, it doesn't have to be the opposite to the one you're working with. So, with Aphrodite, for example, Hephaestus was her husband. So you don't have to start working with Hephaestus because you work with Aphrodite, especially if Hephaestus isn't someone you're going to call on or use. So examples of deities that I have in my life that I work with include Aphrodite and Freya, Hermes, Hecate, and Hecate is actually my main goddess. She is my patron goddess. I have worked with Hades. I've worked with Hades for a full year. Last year I started working with Persephone, so I actually have a married couple there with Hades and Persephone. And then this year I started working with Santa Morte. So there's a couple of different deities from all different cultures as well that I work with. They're not necessarily all from the same ones. And a lot of these deities have chosen me. I didn't choose them. I didn't choose Hecate, I didn't choose Persephone, I didn't choose Hades, and I didn't choose Santa Morte. All of them came to me, and you might see a pattern there. All of them are connected to the dead, necromancy, and the underworld. So there's a certain pattern there. But Aphrodite, I forged a relationship with her myself over the years, and Freya, she came to me through a female circle that I did with a number of different women, and she came through to 3 of us that worked together specifically and blessed us all, and actually gave us a totem animal that connected us all at the same time. So I continued to work with her. Sadly, the other 2 didn't, but I did, and I've continued that relationship with her, so that now it's either Aphrodite or Freya that I incorporate into my spiritual practice when working with love magic and love energies. I also have a couple of angels that I work with, a couple of daemons and demons as well over the years I've forged relationships with, and again, I'll explain them differently in a separate video, guys. There are also certain types of fairies, unicorns, mermaids that I've worked with, and all these forces I've built relationships with in order to incorporate them in my life, and I did it the same way I've just described to you now. So definitely take your time with it. Don't feel you have to incorporate them if you don't want to, and I would certainly say that out of all the divine beings that have worked with me, the best relationships are the ones where they choose you, not the other way around, because you didn't force those relationships. You didn't just reach out and go, hey. They chose you because they watched you for a certain length of time and they knew they wanted to work with you, and that your path not only resonated with them, but they knew they could aid you upon it. You may also find as well certain deities will come to you on their own, unexpectedly, and you may not know a damn thing about them. So just be vigilant of all the signs, symbols and omens you may receive. Make sure that when you receive them, you thoroughly research all the connections to those symbols and omens, and if you start to see a pattern of the same being coming up, so whether that's a god or goddess or a fairy or an angel, chances are that particular being is saying, hey, I want to work with you, give me a chance, and then try and work with them. But I'd also say as well, just because a divine being reaches out to you doesn't mean you have to work with them, especially if you then research them and you don't like them. And another point I want to make, guys, is if you start working with a god or goddess and you forge a relationship and you get to the point where you go, actually, I really don't like this energy, I really don't feel like they resonate with me, then do what you do with any friendship. Take a moment to sit with that divine energy, summon it into your space and say, thank you, I appreciate all your help and support till now, but I've decided to no longer work with you. Same way you would end a friendship, basically, and just say, you know, in the future I may choose to reconnect, but right now my path is taking me on a different route. Thank them for their time, make one last offering to them, and then slowly after that start to take down that shrine. Now, I wouldn't recommend putting in another energy into that shrine straight away, and I certainly wouldn't recommend moving on to another deity immediately, because that's disrespectful, and obviously bear in mind that divine force may watch you for a certain length of time. So just take your time, guys, and do what's logical. Well, thank you very much for watching this video, and I really hope it's helped you, and if it has, then give me that thumbs up, click the bell so YouTube will tell you when my next video comes out, and of course, check out all my links in the description. Thank you very much.